She stood in court, tears streaming down her face, calling him a monster. But what no one knew, what even she had forgotten, was that her daughter had been recording everything. Betrayed by his wife, hunted in court, and branded unfit to raise his child, Derek Montrose stayed silent. Because in a world of lies, patience isn't weakness. It's the sharpest weapon. If you've ever had to fight silently for the truth or protect someone you love when no one believed you, share your story below. Your voice might help someone else feel less alone. My name is Derek Montrose. I'm 43 years old, and this is the story of how I used everything the military taught me, not for war, but to protect my daughter from betrayal. The first sign was small. Jessica flipped her phone face down during dinner. Not once, but every night for nearly 2 weeks. At first, Derek chalked it up to habit. But then came the late nights at the office, the meetings that ran hours over, the sudden need to shower the moment she got home, even if she had already showered that morning. And it wasn't just the behavior, it was her energy. Cold, detached, like her mind was somewhere else, somewhere far from the house they had built together. Derek had spent years as an Army intelligence officer. He had trained in surveillance, counterintelligence, and pattern recognition. Civilian life had dulled none of those instincts. He didn't panic. He didn't ask questions. He simply watched, listened, waited. When Jessica claimed she had a court hearing that ended late, Derek pulled the credit card statements. There it was, a dinner charge from a bistro downtown, not near the courthouse, not during office hours, and not alone. He confirmed it with a phone call to the restaurant. Table for two, a reservation under the name Reed. He spent the next 48 hours piecing it together. Hotel bookings, duplicate calendar entries, 2 lipstick-stained wine glasses in the dishwasher when only 1 bottle had been opened. Then, finally, an identity. Austin Reed, real estate developer. Divorced twice, known for his luxury condo projects and even more luxurious dating history. He was the kind of man who led with his money and counted on charm to clean up the rest. Derek had never met him, but the digital footprint was obvious. Jessica wasn't the first woman Austin had tangled with, and probably wouldn't be the last. But this one was different. This one was personal. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Derek came home early. The house was quiet. Jessica's car was in the driveway. Another car, a black Mercedes, sat 2 spaces down. Inside, he found the lights low, jazz playing softly from the living room speaker, and a pair of polished leather men's shoes sitting neatly near the door. He didn't speak. Years of training had taught him that silence was power. He took out his phone, hit record, and climbed the stairs like a ghost. The bedroom door wasn't fully closed. Voices drifted through. Laughter. Then muffled words. The kind that told him all he needed to know. He stood there for a moment, just long enough to capture the sound. Then he walked away. He waited downstairs, calm, composed, unreadable. An hour later, Jessica and Austin descended the stairs, fully dressed, though the tension in the air said more than appearances ever could. Jessica froze when she saw him. Her face drained of color. Austin, on the other hand, smirked like it was all just a bad sitcom. "Derek," he said casually, "didn't expect you back so soon. These things happen, man. Some women just need a little more than a weekend warrior can offer." Derek looked him dead in the eye. No emotion, no anger, just resolve. "You have no idea what I'm capable of providing, Austin, but you will." Jessica tried to speak, but Derek was already walking out the door. The rain hit his skin like electricity. His pulse didn't spike. His hands didn't shake. This wasn't the moment he lost everything. It was the moment he chose not to lose control. Because Derek Montrose didn't go to war without a plan. And tonight, a new one had just begun. By Monday morning, Jessica had retained Richard Hoffman, one of the most aggressive family law attorneys in Connecticut. His reputation was built on courtroom theatrics and scorched earth tactics. He didn't believe in compromise. He believed in annihilation. And in Jessica's case, the target was clear. Derek? The strategy was simple. Discredit him completely. They would use his military background as ammunition, twist his intelligence training into a weapon against him, paint him as a man dangerously obsessed with control, suffering from unaddressed PTSD, unable to separate war from family life, a ticking time bomb hiding behind medals and discipline. Within a week, the court filings were thick with accusations. Jessica claimed Derek had monitored her every move for years, that he had bugged her phone, hacked her email, and emotionally manipulated their daughter. She said she feared for Chloe's safety. Feared that Derek, with his surveillance skills and combat experience, might snap, might take custody and disappear. It was a carefully orchestrated narrative, every line rehearsed, every accusation calculated. Austin sat behind her during the preliminary hearing, a smug expression pasted across his face. To the untrained eye, he looked like a supportive partner, but Derek saw it for what it was, a performance. They were trying to bury him under lies, using the very skills he had once been praised for as proof of instability. Derek sat in silence as Jessica testified. Her voice trembled in all the right places. She described him as cold, unpredictable, emotionally distant. She spoke of coded conversations, military routines, and psychological games. The courtroom listened closely. Some nodded, others glanced at Derek with uncertainty. He didn't flinch. When Hoffman took over, the attack deepened. He introduced fabricated timelines, suggesting Derek had been following Jessica long before the affair, that his work in cybersecurity blurred the lines between professional surveillance and personal intrusion. He painted Derek as a man who never turned off the mission, who saw threats everywhere and treated his own wife like an enemy combatant. They submitted screenshots of text messages Derek had never sent, voicemails spliced together to imply he was tracking Jessica's whereabouts, a picture of a military-issued notepad with scribbles they claimed were tactical notes about visitation pickup times. The story was absurd, but it had weight, because it leaned on fear, on public discomfort with what they didn't understand. Military minds, quiet men, calm under fire. Still, Derek said nothing. Not in court, not in interviews, not even to his own legal team. Because Derek wasn't building a defense, he was building something else, something more permanent. While Jessica and Hoffman twisted the truth into a spectacle, Derek had already begun his work, quietly, precisely. He had recorded everything. Not just the affair, but the planning. The whispered conversations between Jessica and Austin about how to provoke him, how to make him look dangerous. He had audio files of Jessica instructing Chloe on what to say if a social worker asked about her father. He had Austin on tape joking about how easy it was to turn courts against military men. They thought they were clever. They thought Derek was broken. But Derek was listening, watching, learning. In the quiet of his apartment, every document they filed became another piece of the puzzle. Every public attack became private leverage. Jessica didn't know it yet, but she was laying the foundation for her own collapse. And Austin, with his vanity and arrogance, was hammering in the nails. Derek had one rule: never react emotionally. That's how they win. He would not break that rule now. He was not the man they were trying to convince the court he was. He was worse, for them. He was patient, methodical, and now he was at war. Derek didn't retaliate with rage. He retaliated with precision. While Jessica and Hoffman flooded the courtroom with fiction, Derek launched a counteroffensive they wouldn't even recognize until it was too late. His first target was Austin. Derek created a trio of anonymous online identities, each crafted to look like international real estate investors. Their backgrounds were believable. Their profiles were filled with financial news articles, LinkedIn connections, industry chatter. Using these false identities, Derek baited Austin with the promise of a $50 million zero-cents luxury condo development. Each message was carefully worded to stoke Austin's ego. They called him a visionary, said his portfolio was unmatched, told him they had watched his rise and wanted him to lead their American expansion. Austin predictably bit hard. He shifted his attention from real clients to chasing Derek's fantasy deal. He spent thousands drafting architectural renderings, holding meetings with city planners, and conducting due diligence on properties that didn't exist. He even began borrowing against existing assets to keep up the illusion of momentum. Meanwhile, Derek was watching every email, every fake negotiation, every step closer to ruin. Then he turned to Jessica. Derek knew her weakness better than anyone. She craved validation. She wanted to be the brilliant attorney in the spotlight, so he began feeding her fantasies. He nominated her anonymously for awards she'd never heard of, arranged phony interviews with legal magazines, sent flattering inquiries from a fake Manhattan firm about potential partnership tracks. Jessica lit up. The effect was immediate. She began acting like a rising legal star. She took on high-profile cases beyond her experience, spent extravagantly on wardrobe, office decor, and PR. She made promises to clients she couldn't keep. Her caseload ballooned, her temper grew short, and slowly cracks formed in her professional image. Cracks that Derek documented in detail. But his masterstroke came when he turned them against each other. Using surveillance from Jessica's own devices and intercepted messages from Austin's accounts, Derek planted just enough information to breed suspicion. He left a private investigator's business card in Austin's glove compartment, planted fake receipts suggesting Jessica had purchased spyware, inserted emails into Austin's inbox suggesting Jessica was leaking information about his finances. Then, he reversed the strategy, creating fake texts from Austin that hinted at him photographing Jessica's legal files. Jessica found the PI's card and panicked. Austin found the emails and grew paranoid. They confronted each other, but neither could admit the full truth. Jessica began hiding her phone. Austin changed his passwords. They stopped communicating openly. Their once unshakable alliance, built on mutual betrayal, began to erode under the weight of distrust. Jessica started questioning if Austin was using her for intel about Derek's background, something she could never prove. Austin, meanwhile, began thinking Jessica was manipulating him for his money, planning to discard him after the divorce settled. Derek didn't have to say a word. The silence between them did the damage for him. And all the while, Chloe stayed with him on weekends. Derek remained the calm parent, the one who helped with homework, made pancakes, and read bedtime stories. He shielded her from the war unfolding just miles away, even as he collected evidence piece by piece. Jessica and Austin thought they were playing offense. They didn't realize they were inside a trap meticulously designed by a man trained in psychological warfare. Every step they took was calculated. Every fight they had was orchestrated. Every lie they believed in was bait. And Derek never had to lift a finger in court, because he had already done all the work where it mattered most, in their minds. From the quiet of his temporary apartment, Derek Montrose sat behind 3 screens and a single objective. He monitored everything: their conversations, their meltdowns, the growing wreckage of a relationship he had once been written out of. With every hour, the cracks widened. Jessica and Austin were unraveling, and Derek captured every frame. Jessica's phone calls were recorded, her text messages archived, her erratic behavior documented through surveillance cameras planted in her home office and the living room. Austin's desperation poured through his emails, his business communications, even his GPS pings showing late-night drives to vacant properties that never existed. Derek watched it all with the precision of a man who had studied human weakness in war zone. He saw Jessica pacing at 2 a.m., yelling into her phone. He listened as Austin screamed at a contractor who pulled out of another doomed deal. Jessica broke a glass vase during one argument, sobbing that nothing was working anymore. Austin stormed out, calling her delusional. Their dream of a perfect life built from Derek's ruins was collapsing. Not from sabotage, from stress, suspicion, and their own selfishness. Then came the breaking point. Austin's fake development deal was bleeding him dry. He had borrowed too heavily, overextended his credit, and was now facing foreclosure on 2 properties. With nowhere else to turn, he pressed Jessica for cash. He framed it as a temporary loan, promising to pay her back when the deal closed. But Jessica, already spiraling from career missteps and mounting pressure, didn't see it that way. She thought he was trying to clean her out. When she found documents in his briefcase, planted of course by Derek, implying offshore accounts and legal power of attorney drafts, she panicked. She called the police and reported financial manipulation, claimed Austin was attempting to take her assets. When Austin returned that evening, Jessica met him at the door screaming, accusing him of theft, of betrayal, of using her. The fight was loud, chaotic, and ugly, but it was also fully recorded. Jessica hurled accusations, some real, many fabricated in her unraveling mind. Austin defended himself badly, shouting that she had used him just to ruin Derek, that everything she had was built on lies. Jessica fired back with claims that he had stolen legal documents, that he had photographed confidential client files during their time together. Neither had proof. Neither realized Derek already held the evidence, and neither knew that every word of that screaming match was being captured by high-fidelity audio devices installed behind a vent in the foyer. The police arrived too late to stop the shouting, but early enough to take statements. No charges were filed that night, but an official incident report was logged. Derek downloaded the file from the public system within the hour and saved it to his archive. It would become Exhibit B. Back in his apartment, Derek didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply logged the date, time, and details. Austin Reed had officially hit bottom. Jessica Montrose was spiraling into instability. And Derek, ever the soldier, had never fired a shot. He made no public moves, no legal accusations, no confrontations, just silence, patience, and relentless observation. His weapon wasn't rage, it was record-keeping. And now, with a meticulously built dossier, audio, video, documents, statements, he had everything he needed. Not to ruin them. They were doing that themselves. His only job was to be ready when the moment came, and it was coming fast. The courtroom was tense. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, catching dust in the air like smoke after a battle. Derek Montrose sat motionless at the defense table, his expression unreadable, his hands folded in front of him. His attorney, Patricia Mills, said nothing. She had said almost nothing the entire hearing. Jessica took the stand with the practiced poise of a courtroom veteran. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but her voice was clear and trembling in all the right places. She spoke of fear, of confusion, of the husband she no longer recognized. She described Derek as cold, methodical, emotionally distant, a man whose military discipline had turned into obsession and psychological control. She called him a master manipulator, a man who saw people as tools. She said he used their daughter Chloe as a pawn in a calculated campaign of emotional warfare. Her attorney, Richard Hoffman, leaned into every word. He painted Derek as a ticking time bomb. He warned of invisible damage from years of classified military operations. He cited PTSD, surveillance training, and what he called Derek's invasive fixation on controlling his environment. He said Chloe was not safe with a man who treated everyone around him like a potential threat. The courtroom was silent when Jessica stepped down. The judge, Caroline Wright, flipped through her notes, nodding slowly. She looked toward the defense table. Ms. Mills, do you have a defense to present? Patricia Mills stood. Her voice was low and measured. Your Honor, my client believes that someone else in this courtroom would like to speak on his behalf. Judge Wright raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry? Derek's attorney continued. His daughter Chloe Montrose has asked to address the court. Hoffman was instantly on his feet. Action. Your Honor, this child has been manipulated for months. This is not an appropriate. Judge Wright lifted her hand, cutting him off. Mr. Hoffman, I'll decide what's appropriate. Mr. Montrose, would you like to speak? Chloe stood from the front row, small for 9, but standing tall. She clutched a tablet in both hands. Derek watched her silently, his posture unchanged but his gaze fixed. Yes, Your Honor, I have something to show you. The courtroom hushed. Chloe walked to the bench and handed the judge the tablet. She tapped the screen once and stepped back. Audio filled the room. It began with a child's voice, Chloe's voice. Mommy, why are you always crying when you come home from Uncle Austin's house? Jessica's voice followed, strained and soft. I'm not crying, sweetheart. Mommy's just tired. But Uncle Austin makes you sad, and he's mean to Daddy. There was a pause. Then Chloe again. Yesterday I heard you tell Uncle Austin that you're going to make sure Daddy never sees me again, even if you have to lie about him hurting us. Jessica responded, Chloe, you shouldn't be listening to grown-up conversations. But Mommy, why would you lie? Another pause, then Jessica's voice, calculated, cold, and undeniable. Sometimes we have to say things that aren't completely true to protect the people we love. You'll understand when you're older. Chloe's voice didn't waver. But Daddy says lying is always wrong. Even when it's hard, we should tell the truth. The room was frozen, not a whisper, not a movement. Only the sound of Jessica's own voice as the recording continued. Jessica coaching Chloe, rehearsing answers to give the court-appointed psychologist, planning with Austin how to make Derek look dangerous. And then, her voice crisp and damning. If we play this right, the judge will think he's unstable. We just need a few good tears and the rest will fall into place. Jessica's voice faded. The recording ended. No one breathed. Jessica sat pale and still. Hoffman looked like he'd been punched in the chest. The judge turned slowly to Chloe. Where did you get this, young lady? Chloe answered quietly. I recorded it on my tablet. Daddy taught me that if someone is doing something wrong, you should keep evidence. He said the truth always wins if you're patient enough. Judge Wright blinked. And how long have you been doing this? Since Mommy started acting different. Since she started lying about Daddy. Jessica stood up, her voice cracking. Your Honor, she's been coached. This isn't... Judge Wright raised her hand again. Sit down, Mrs. Montrose. She turned back to Chloe. "Is there anything else you'd like to tell the court?" Chloe finally looked at her mother. "I love you, Mummy, but I can't live with someone who lies. Daddy never lies. He tells me the truth, even when it's hard." She walked back to her seat. Derek placed a hand gently on her shoulder. And for the first time since the hearing began, Judge Wright looked at Derek. Not with suspicion, but with respect. The storm had arrived, but Derek hadn't lifted a finger. His daughter had brought the truth into the light. The courtroom remained frozen in stunned silence. Jessica's voice, her admissions, her strategy, all of it had just echoed through the chambers in her own words, spoken so clearly and calmly it was impossible to deny. Chloe's quiet voice was the last thing anyone heard before the audio stopped. "But Daddy says lying is always wrong. Even when it's hard, we should tell the truth." The sound of a 9-year-old telling her mother she couldn't live with lies had landed heavier than any cross-examination ever could. Jessica sat frozen, unable to speak, her face drained of all color. She looked not at the judge, not at Hoffman, not even at her daughter, but at Derek. And what she saw in his expression wasn't gloating or rage. It was a cold, resolute calm. He had not needed to raise his voice. He had never tried to destroy her. But he had prepared for this moment, with unshakable patience. Richard Hoffman slowly turned toward his client, horror spreading across his features. Everything he had built his case upon had just shattered. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then stopped. He had nothing to say. He gathered his papers without a word, his silence saying more than any argument ever could. Judge Wright broke the silence. Her voice was steady, but her tone had shifted completely. "I am granting full legal and physical custody of Chloe Montrose to her father, effective immediately. Furthermore, I am ordering a criminal investigation into the conduct of the plaintiff during these proceedings. The evidence presented today raises serious concerns regarding perjury, witness tampering, and parental alienation. This court will not tolerate the weaponization of children." Jessica gasped. It was barely audible. She stood, swaying slightly. "Your Honor, please. Chloe doesn't understand what she's doing. She's just a child." Judge Wright held up a hand. "Sit down, Mrs. Montrose. You are no longer speaking as a mother. You're speaking as a defendant under active investigation. I suggest you consult with your attorney before making another statement." Jessica collapsed into her chair. Her perfect image, the calm, composed mother, was gone. All that remained was someone caught in her own trap, unraveling with every breath. Chloe returned to her seat beside Derek. She sat tall, hands folded over the tablet that had just dismantled an entire legal strategy. Derek placed a hand gently on her shoulder, but his face stayed calm. There was no need to speak. The message had been delivered. The judge dismissed the courtroom shortly after. The gallery emptied in stunned silence, a far cry from the whispers and murmurs that had filled the room earlier. Derek and Chloe remained seated as the bailiff approached. "Mr. Montrose, Judge Wright has asked that you meet briefly with Child Services and court staff to formalize the custody transfer paperwork. It won't take long." Derek nodded and thanked him. As they walked out of the courtroom, Jessica remained behind, surrounded by court officers. Her eyes followed them, but she didn't call out. She didn't protest. For once, there was nothing left to manipulate. Outside the courthouse, the sun had begun to break through the clouds. Derek knelt down beside Chloe, his eyes soft for the first time in weeks. "You know you didn't have to do that, right?" Chloe nodded. "I know." Derek continued. "I would have found another way. I would never have asked you to take on something so heavy." Chloe looked him in the eye, her voice clear and steady. "You taught me that we protect our family, Daddy. I just did what you do." Derek didn't answer right away. He studied her for a long moment, seeing not just a child, but someone growing into something powerful. Someone capable of standing in the storm and holding the line. Someone who inherited his strength. Not his skills, but the moral compass behind them. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'm proud of you, Chloe. Not just because you helped me, but because you understood what was right, even when it was hard." Chloe smiled. "You always say the truth is like water. It might take time, but it always finds its way through." Derek stood, holding her hand as they walked down the steps. Reporters lingered by the sidewalk, unsure whether to approach. But Derek didn't stop. He didn't need the spotlight. The war had never been about public approval. It had been about protecting what mattered. And in the end, the only voice that had needed to speak had been Chloe's. And the truth had won. The days following the custody hearing unfolded like the final act of a play that had been written long before anyone realized the ending. Austin Reed was the first to fall. News of his fraudulent $50 million, 0 cents development project spread like wildfire among investors and clients. Lawsuits poured in. His accounts were frozen. By the end of the week, Austin was in custody, facing a litany of fraud and embezzlement charges. His smug confidence, once so loud and unshakable, was replaced by desperation and silence. Jessica's collapse came just as swiftly. With the courtroom recording now part of the public record, the state bar initiated disciplinary proceedings against her. She was placed on immediate suspension, and within weeks she faced formal disbarment for perjury and professional misconduct. Her career, which she had spent years building, crumbled overnight. But perhaps the greatest blow wasn't the legal fallout. It was Chloe's quiet refusal to see her. Jessica reached out through calls and messages, but Chloe wasn't ready. Maybe she never would be. Trust, once broken, doesn't always mend. Derek didn't revel in their destruction. He had never needed to. Their own greed, lies, and arrogance had built the path to their downfall. He had simply stood at the edge and let them walk themselves off the cliff. His satisfaction wasn't in watching them fail, but in knowing Chloe was safe, protected, and finally free from the chaos they had tried to create. Driving home that evening, Derek glanced in the rearview mirror. Chloe sat in the back seat, her tablet resting on her lap. But she wasn't watching anything. She was staring out the window, her small hand gripping the seatbelt strap. The storm was over, but the weight of what happened still lingered. He reached back and gently squeezed her hand. "You okay, kiddo?" She nodded. "I think so. But it's weird. It feels like we won, but I still feel sad." Derek understood. Victories like this weren't clean. They were messy, complicated, and full of scars. He chose his words carefully. "It's okay to feel sad, Chloe. Sometimes winning doesn't mean cheering, it just means surviving. And you did more than that. You told the truth. That's worth everything." Chloe smiled faintly and leaned forward. "Daddy?" "Yeah?" "You didn't have to fight them like you did you?" Derek kept his eyes on the road. "I had to protect you. That was the only thing that mattered." She nodded again, satisfied with the answer, and rested her head against the window. Derek glanced at her reflection and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Later that night, after Chloe had gone to bed, Derek sat alone on the porch, the cool air wrapped around him, and for the first time in months he let himself breathe without tension. His mind wandered back to his years in the army, back to the lessons that had shaped him: patience, discipline, strategy. Those lessons had left him. But this time they had been used not for war, but for justice. He hadn't needed weapons. He hadn't needed to shout or break down doors. All he had needed was time, truth, and the quiet resolve to see it through. Jessica and Austin had supplied their own rope. He had simply handed it to them and watched them tie the knots. The message was clear. Truth doesn't need violence. It doesn't scream or demand attention. It waits. It watches. And when the time comes, it wins. Because lies always collapse under their own weight. Derek knew this chapter was over, but the lessons would remain. Chloe would grow up knowing what it meant to stand for something, to choose integrity, even when it was hard. She had already shown more strength than most adults he had ever met. As he finished his coffee and looked up at the stars, one thought lingered in his mind. Jessica and Austin had thought they were playing chess. They believed they were clever, that they were moving pieces against a man too broken to fight back. But Derek Montrose was never the king, never the pawn. He was the board. And they had been too arrogant to check for traps.